cartridge. Don't worry, I got my professional attire on.
Streaming tonight. If he was testing that.
Aaron, when you get these, can you send them, go ahead and pass them across me somewhere, get some too.
Oh, these chairs. Okay.
Whoops.
Is there anything out about the plan? This?
Just go.
Okay, go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I don't think we have any agenda adjustments, do we?
Amazingly, we do not.
Anybody else want to propose an agenda adjustment? There, okay, seeing no agenda adjustments.
I would like to point out that the State of the Union address starts at 9 p.m.
No pressure, Mark.
Just saying.
Is that a good reason to be out or a good reason not to be out? All right.
I'll leave that matter to your own normative judgment.
So consideration of the minutes. We have minutes for January 30th. No, I'm sorry, for January 9th. So I would make a motion to adopt the minutes for January 9th as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? 4-0. Next up are warrants. I will make a motion to adopt warrants 14, 15, 15CI, payroll 15, and January purse. Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Acknowledgements. Should we start at your end, Aaron? Put you on the spot.
I'm sure there are so many things I should acknowledge, but I've got nothing right now.
I also have nothing at this time.
It's kind of January, isn't it? I think I'm drawing a blank too. Mark, anything, or Meredith, anything for you?
I do not have anything that I can think of right now. Sorry.
Okay, Mark?
I guess the one thing I'd put out there, and this is, I'm going to speak specifically about the middle school because it's what I see. So it's not leaving the high school and ASA out isn't happening there. But because I'm coaching in a number of rec basketball teams where I'm having to use kind of the same space at the middle school gym in short order. I'd just like to acknowledge the custodians there for getting that turned over in such kind of rapid fashion so that it can be used by, in this case, community groups. Oftentimes they have to get, there's fans that have to get out from middle school game and then it gets turned over pretty quickly so we can use it. So I appreciate that.
I do have one.
All right, go ahead, Meredith.
I'd like to acknowledge Angie McGlellan, second grade teacher at Asa Adams. She's had a month of community speakers coming in to read to her class and share their role in the community. And I had the privilege of doing it for one day. And we have some really impressive second graders that were just really attentive and also insightful about connections they made from what I read to their habits of mind. Just so well spoken. And I know that's also a tribute to Angie and the work she's doing, but I know that Mark was also a community reader. And so I appreciate Angie. I know it was a lot of effort to line that up, but what a great opportunity for our community to be in our schools and see our students and be a part of their day, but also for our students to get to hear about members of the community and what they do. So kudos to Angie.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. It's a great program that she's got.
Yeah.
Great. Becca or Ben, anything from the students?
Just acknowledging the teachers at OHS, the start of the third quarter. It's going great, so that's it.
Great, thanks. Any further acknowledgements? Next up, we have public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing no public comment, we'll move to presentations. We weren't sure, do the student advisors have one or not?
We don't.
That's fine. We're not doing any others. Superintendent presentation.
Yeah, I think I don't have any additional items other than some things throughout the agenda, so we can hold on my items as we get to things on the agenda.
Great, so we'll get straight to the big discussions. So we have several lengthy documents with discussion on those, so we're going to start with the enrollment study. Just put the context on this. As you know, we've embarked on a 5-year capital facilities plan, and part of that, just as a matter of good due diligence, but also as a matter of requirement if we're applying for state money, is to get an independent outside assessment of our enrollment projections, which we have hired the firm NESDEC, which do quite a few of these around New England, and they have put together the study. The board's had a chance to look at it, but Meredith, you want to introduce Don?
Okay, yeah, so, and they all have a copy of it.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yes. Yes, so as Brian said, sorry, I was talking, I think that you said, we hired NESDEC to complete our enrollment study. NESDEC is a firm out of the Boston area, and they work with schools all around New England and districts all around New England, providing a number of services, and this is one of the services they provide for districts. And Don Kennedy is with us and was the principal kind of investigator, I guess, on this study. He spent a day with us back in November, along with John Kennedy, his colleague, and we've had quite a bit of correspondence over the past couple of months to get to the point of having the report today. So we appreciate you making the trek in probably less than ideal road conditions to be with us tonight, Don.
My brother, who's a retired librarian from USM, is used to making the trek, at least the part between Portland and Orono, because he was a negotiator for the librarian's contract several times.
So you had
he
an
to go back and
escort,
forth
that's great.
to Orono for negotiating sessions.
So, the University of Maine Professional Staff Union.
Nice, welcome.
Can you adjust the size so that the slide shows the whole? Yeah,
Sharon,
that's fine.
is it showing on that TV?
No, I'm not seeing anything.
It worked on mine. Do we need to use mine? Earlier.
You want to jump on yours?
Yeah.
I got the cursed computer. The tech guy, he's got the,
That guy who has the newer computer.
yeah, or cursed. I've never gotten it to work. Sorry about that.
I'm just getting it so it'll just put the whole.
Yep.
All these are turned the wrong way, so I'm trying to turn them.
Yeah, backwards.
Yep. Yeah, we'll plug it in.
Yeah, I was gonna say this finger was right. Give it a second. Oh.
Okay. Yeah, you can just either use the arrows
Okay.
or the.
Okay. Okay, looks like everything's working. I'm going to skip across the waves and not try to talk about everything in here because you don't have that much time. But I'd like to go all the way through, if I can, with the slides, and then take questions at the end. So if you can hold your questions till the end, that will help me not lose my track of thought going through. The bottom line is essentially that your number of students is expected conservatively to rise by another 123 or so, even if you did no additional recruiting. So you're really in a good place. I'd certainly commend the superintendent and the board for being planful. You're going to have a chance to make some choices that will allow you to manage student growth in particular grades where you do want it to grow further or don't necessarily, because there are more people who want to be in the Orono schools than you perhaps have spaces for, and that will give you a chance as a board to make some long-range planning decisions. When we met with people, we found that they have a great enthusiasm for your academics, your arts, your sports, and the school community. So you're in a good position, and I can see why children in neighboring schools are interested in being in your district. So this is the bottom line. The slide number 4 shows the history. You look backwards in, I don't know, I guess this is not going to show if I show it now. Okay, I won't use the pointer. The lines that show the first 10 years, 2007 through 2016, are numbers from the Department of Education. The numbers for 2017-18 are from the local district because the Department of Education hasn't yet posted that information. And we wanted to point out in there, particularly grade 12, you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner, it shows you that the state has not counted the international students. They treat them from their statistical point of view as if they were visitors. So only in your own records will you find a complete acknowledgement of everyone who was a student here. And we wanted particularly to point out 12th grade to you because you'll see, for example, this year you had 92 students in the 12th grade, the senior year, who are either residents or tuition students or superintendent permitted documents, but they don't count the international students. So you'll see that whereas it says there are 102 12th graders this year, that's the true number. It's 92 plus the 10 international students. In the previous year, it was 87 plus 14 international students. So where it appears as if there were only 97 12th graders, this year growing to 102, it actually was 101 and 102. The math is a little bit tricky when the state counts numbers differently from the way they get counted the bodies in the local district. Let's skip the next one and go on to page 6. This, instead of looking to the past, looks to the future. And this shows in the lower right-hand column the source for the bottom line statement that we expect you to grow by 123 students. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that's the sum of the difference. The 774 K through 12 students this year. We expect to grow to 897, even if you wouldn't do any initial extra recruiting more than what you would normally have done. Let's skip the next 2 pages, 3 pages. This shows in 2010 and 2011, for example, that you were beginning to have some really robust numbers showing up in kindergarten, more than had been born 10 years prior. And the robust situation that you've got in real estate now looks like it's going to continue, and that's part of what we figured into the projection. On slide 10, I know I'm racing through these, but I think it'll be more interesting when we get to your questions, but I didn't want to miss any of the highlights of the bits of data that it would be useful, I think, for you to see. This long blue and white line shows you grades K through 12, and you'll notice, for example, in 10th grade, it says 30T and 1S. That's the superintendent documents are the 1S. That's the permission for the additional student who doesn't live here, and the 30T are 30 tuition students. Then, in addition to that, are the international students. But this shows you in which grade the other superintendent agreement and tuition students are in. On page 12, there's some census information here, which I think may be interesting to you. The high number of rental occupied units are due to the university being in Orono. The Orono population, as it's shown in the U.S. Census, in 2000, for example, was 9,112, but you have to subtract out of that the 3,000 university students who were in what the Census Bureau calls group quarters. So there were actually 6,088 students, or 6,088 residents in the community after you subtracted out the students. And that number has grown to a little bit over 7,000 in 2016, according to the census estimate. The U.S. Census has its own unique vocabulary, and we had to subtract out what they call the non-institutionalized group quarters, which means, in your case, dormitories. In number 13, I thought you would be interested on that very bottom line where it says the U.S. Census in 2016 has estimated that 7.5% of Orono households, in 7.5% of Orono households, a language other than English is spoken by persons of age 5 and above. Not only are the number of English language learner students going up throughout the nation, and you can see the projections that the Census Bureau has for 2020. Maine has the least increase, but does have an increase, and even Orono is growing in its number of students who are learning English as a second language. Slide 14 shows on the right-hand side, if you just scan from 1999 on, there was a period of time up through about 2010 when you were gaining about 19 additional building permits a year on average, but you've been gaining 30 to 32 a year since 2010, and we expect that robust amount of growth to continue. We talked with the planning department both the outgoing planner and the incoming new planner, and this is some of the information that we learned. This talks about the different particular places that either have been recently occupied or are in the process of being built, have been permitted, and permits have been pulled and are under construction, and within the next couple of years will be occupied. This was more planning for additional construction than has been the case, almost double the amount that you've been having in the last decade, and it looks like it's going to be continuing. The pilot project that the planners and the town manager are involved with are looking into 3 areas about vernal pool regulations, reducing minimum lot size, and creating an overlay district to allow more single-family and owner-occupied 2-family units. And we didn't make any assumption that any of those would come to fruition. So the projection that you're going to get more students is over and above anything that could happen here. But if any of these are approved, any one of them, or maybe several of them, all potentially could lead to additional students moving in to the community. But they are not assumed in our projection because we don't know what will be the outcome of those discussions. In the information from realtors, we went the next step and talked about the outcomes that they're seeing in sales, and this is a result of talking to 3 or 4 people who are veterans renting and selling property in Orono. This is the information they told us, and it's very consistent with what the planners had told us as well. We also talked to them about what are the factors that might accelerate or impede sales growth, and the cooperation and activities with between the university and the Orono Public Schools are working in your favor. Rising mortgage rates would impede sales volume, but at this point, no one is expecting that, at least in the short run, is going to slow any of this additional in-migration. On page 18, there's a description of the tuition students, how many were in the high school, how many were in the prior grades, and there's a red detailed breakdown of the students that are tuitioned into the high school. And it's worth taking just a minute to acknowledge that if you think of this year, which we believe is a pretty typical year for you, that there are 32 students who are tuitioned into 9th grade at Orono High School. So these freshmen, 30 of the 32, 30 of whom came from the 8th grade in one of 5 communities: Glenburn, Greenbush, Indian Island, Milford, or Vesey. And if you refer to that 8th grade as the base, the 5-town base, the base that they came from was 117, and those 117 8th graders last year became 30 9th graders, the typical amount that comes to you, but it's only 30% of, only 26%, those 30 students are only 26% of the total of 117 who became tuitioned as freshmen into Orono High School. If you decided you wanted to do more recruiting than you've been doing, and you raised that 26% to a higher number, you could get additional students if you wanted to. Now, you may want to or not want to, depending on how much space you have, the programs, other kinds of issues. But you're in a planful situation that puts you in the driver's seat in terms of deciding how would we like to go with this. and what would be to the advantage of our community. So you've gotten the data now that will allow you to make some intelligent choices about this. In the next 5 or 10 school years, the size of this base group that was 117 eighth graders last year, that 117 is going to grow in the next few years and be at least 117. In some years, it may be as much as 122, 125. So whether or not you expand beyond the 26% of that number, there's plenty of opportunity for you to get additional freshmen in Orono High School if you want to. So your planfulness and being ahead of the curve, time is on your side to decide what you'd like to do with this. The lower half of the slide shows the superintendent agreement students, and that's a relatively new feature, and it's something that you may also want to talk about. How many students do we want to accept, and into what grades, and under what kinds of conditions? The next slide, 19, is about the international students. I won't talk about that in any detail, but we have learned from the sources that we've talked with in 2 or 3 different states that no one really has any clear idea how the national debate on immigration and visas is going to affect this. So at least for the short run, I think it's probably safe to assume it will continue as it had been, but who knows what's going to happen there. We didn't want to speculate in any direction, but this does show you this exciting, unique feature which you've had in past years and may want to continue doing. And we did hear from one source that the type of visa that's used below the 12th grade may be a little bit more at risk than the 12th grade visa. So no one really knows, and there's no point at this point in speculating about it. The last part isn't really part of the enrollment study, except that we have dealings with about 350 school districts every year in the 6 New England states. And we've located 2 in different states who we think exhibit best practice in terms of how they've developed their websites and how they've developed their, what you might call recruiting, using social media for other students. And it's something that you may or may not want to check out. I've talked with those 2 superintendents. Neither one of them is looking for any particular publicity or glory out of this, but both of them have agreed to share their stories if they were asked. And my suspicion would be, if I have a conversation with Meredith in a year and a half or 2 from now, and ask how are things going with the enrollment study, that what she may say is that what made the most difference to Orono is all the new information we found out from these other districts, because we think there's a lot there to be learned, and it's something that if you would like to, you can pick up on and might allow you to further jumpstart your use of technology and social media and recruiting in a way that's consistent with your improvement of this district in the past. So I'll be quiet now, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. And I apologize, it took us a little while to get this up and running.
Thank you. That's a lot of very detailed information, and it's very helpfully presented to give us a plan going forward. I know I have 2 questions, but I'll give anybody else, if somebody else wants to jump in first. Okay, I'll jump in first. So, I mean, it strikes me there's 2 major areas of uncertainty, and I just want to make sure I understand how you did the projections in these 2 areas. So maybe looking at page 6. Mm-hmm. So you know, there are kids living in town who are ages 0 to 5 who haven't shown up in our schools yet. Once they show up in our schools, you know, we're tracking them. And so I think I saw on a slide somewhere that you're taking bursts from the town clerk, which is, you know, one obvious place to get that data, but then you have kids who may move in when they're not born here, you know, move in at the age of 2 or move out at the age of 2.
Right.
My impression, it's an anecdotal impression, is that we actually are gaining in that age group instead of losing relative to the burst. But I'm just wondering how you how you project that age 0 to 5 cohort for Orono.
It's a good question. If we had a long time to talk, I'd refer you to page 9, which shows you some of those relationships between the birth year and the kindergarten year. The most common way and the simplest way to project kindergartners is to take births. Now, you need a good source of births. We found that the best source we can get is the official numbers that come from the State Department of Public Health, which is where all these numbers come from, with the exception of the very most recent years, because frequently the town clerk will have more up-to-date information than the state has, and we take temporary numbers from the town clerk. Your town clerk was not only forthcoming with recent data, but she even gave us numbers for 2017, and we deal with almost 400 districts a year, and Orono is the first district that we've got the 2017 births, because your town clerk was right on top of it and had all our vitals up to date and easily gave us the numbers. We tried to project that forward based on that statistic. We also, when we are doing the regular annual enrollment projections that we do with affiliated districts, that we do on a 12-month update basis, we try to get them to count their fourth graders, four-year-olds as well, and a lot of towns don't do that, but the ones that do it, we're able to give more accurate projections to. You're right, people do move in and out of town with children that young, and sometimes they'll be born here and then they don't end up in kindergarten, or the reverse takes place. And you would see, if we talked in some detail about slide 9, what the history is over the years of the connection between the birth year and then 5 years later, do they or don't they show up in kindergarten? Is there a trend where 10% more show up or 10% fewer show up, or you know, what is the trend and how does it change over time? But that's how it's done, and kindergarten is the most difficult year to project.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So let's say the 2019 kindergarten number.
Right.
Is that just the number of births in 2014, or is that adjusted based on your estimate of move-ins and move-outs?
On that slide 6,
Yep.
the 2014 shows 35 births and 40 showed up in kindergarten. So the ratio was 40 over 35. I don't have the number, you know, with.
But it's a proportion.
But you'll see there are. Let's take some recent years. This year, the 47 kindergartners came from 41 births. The prior year, 50 kindergartners came from 43 births. So in both cases, you're getting more Ks than were born here 5 years ago. So that the trend, at least in those 2 years, was toward net move-ins as opposed to move-outs.
And looking at your projections for 2018, 19, 20, it looks like you have the same thing. That number's bigger. The kindergarten is bigger than the birth number.
Okay.
Which
Oh, yeah, okay, we're on a projections page, right.
Yep.
Okay. If we had been on a history page, that would have been on slide 4. And on slide 4, okay, it was the reverse. In this year, you had 41 kindergartners generated from 44 births, but the prior year, last year, you had 49 kindergartners who came from 38 births. So you had two different trends in opposite directions, and that's why you need many more years of history to see what the real trends are. But it is better if you can get the 4-year-olds counted, and the school systems that do count 4-year-olds frequently do the following. In the spring, maybe, February, March, whenever it is, they have kindergarten registration. They are trying to make a database not only of the students who are going to turn 5, but they also ask about younger siblings and younger neighbors and younger children in a playgroup, whatever. And they're trying to make as complete a database as they can on who lives in town. And so they're as much interested, or almost as much interested, at kindergarten registration to find out who's going to come in a year from now, as well as the ones who are going to be coming in the next fall.
Yep, I know predicting 5-year-olds is definitely a challenge. I'm just trying to understand. So I'm on slide 6, and I'm looking at, for example, 2019.
Which page?
Page 6.
6, okay.
Projected enrollment, and I'm looking at 2019, and I see 40 births, and I see a projection of 46 kindergartners showing up in 2024 or 2025.
Well, in the 2019 year, it's projecting 40 kindergartners off of a year that had 35 births in 2014.
He's talking about the birth year of 2019.
I'm looking at the birth year. I'm looking across the row of 2019.
All right, the birth year of 2019 and the school year of 2024. Right. So 48 kindergartners from 40 births.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense because you look at the last few years, we get about 6 more kids than we had who were born.
Right.
So I mean, basically, my intuition that we have more kids moving in than out, looks like it's true, but that's already wired into the report.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? So looking at historically, you look at the trend line for births versus kindergarten enrollment, and to move forward, you take the births and apply what you found to be the trend over time.
Right.
To project the kindergarten enrollment compared to those births. So, but what we see on your enrollments is you don't have any years that dip for us in kindergarten enrollment over the next 10 years.
That's because the trend right now, in talking with the planners, they say we're building more buildings. In talking with the realtors, they say we're selling more homes than we used to be selling. In looking at the trend lines, we are seeing, it looks like you're on a robust wave of real estate right now, and how long that robustness will last, we don't know, but it doesn't appear, at least in the short run, that it's going to end in a year or two. There's enough talk about planning for the future going on in this building, in Town Hall, and trying to get Orono to be a more family-related community than it currently is. We were quoted, by a couple of town officials that only 18% of the employees of the university live in Orono, and we'd like to up that percentage. We're working on this in several different ways. So all the factors that would go into continuing the robust real estate cycle looks like they're still in place. So it looks like it would justify choosing a ratio that is descriptive of what you were saying, that it shows an upward trend. And it appears that, at least for the short run, that's going to continue.
Brian, what it seems like, I mean, if I look at table 6, what it seems to me, and I just finished doing it on each line, it seems to me that starting in birth year 2013 and going to school year 2018, which is obviously going to be next year, so we don't know that. So that's the first year where we've got a projection rather than a real number. It's that the projection is that for that year is that there's going to be 15% more students enrolled in kindergarten than there were births in the 5 years previous. And then if you go down each line, that 15% is repeated. And that's what that projection is. Where that 15% comes from is the question, because if you look at 2012 and 2017-18, which is real number to real number, that's not a 15% number. So whether you're using that based on Census Bureau data or whether you're using that on information from realtor interviews or town council is unclear, but somehow there's a 15% increase baked in from births to kindergarten enrollments, and that covers, excuse me, school year 18-19 through school year 27-28.
I don't have the master sheet with me, but I can give this information to the superintendent. I'll send it back electronically in a couple days. But we would typically use a 3, 4, or 5 year trend, depending on what looked like it was the most appropriate. We wouldn't typically use a trend from 1 year or 2 years. That would be extraordinary. I can't remember doing that in 10 years. So it would be usually a 3 or 4 or 5 year trend. And what we would do is choose a ratio that seemed like it best fit what the overall factors are presently at work. So 15% ratio of increase from births to kindergarten is a high ratio. When it gets much higher than that, it would put you in the top maybe 10% in New England. But there are some districts that do that and are getting twice as many kindergartners as they had born there. That would typically be a community where the homes are very expensive and you might not have enough cash or be far enough into your career to be able to purchase a house in that community when your children are that young, and they may be coming in at 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade instead of coming in at kindergarten. But that's not Orono; that's a different place.
Yep. Yeah, if you could send the details on, I'm sure we're going to get questions about that, where that number came from. That'd be great. Looking at page 4 and noticing the history, it bounces around a lot, but we have had more years where it was a growth rather than a decrease. But yep. So yeah, details of where that came from would be helpful. Thank you. And the other question, I mean, the other group that's obviously hard to predict, and you already talked about this. I'm looking at slide 18.
Yes.
So the tuition students, and honestly, you could guess or make an argument in a lot of different directions, but I just want to make sure I understand where this one came from. So if I'm understanding, you took 2017-18 and noted that we had 32 tuition students, and you basically took that 32 tuition students and carried that forward into future years? Is that correct?
Yes, we did that for 2 reasons. One is we looked to see what's the ratio of any students going from grade 8 to 9 to 10, and what typically happens from one grade to the next. So in all of these, the projected numbers are the result of our making a human choice for a ratio to go from B to K, from K to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, et cetera. So a choice of 14 ratios over the 14 years. and trying to reflect in each movement from one year to the next, typically what's happening, what's recently been happening in the last, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years as children transition from grade X to grade Y.
I guess I'm specifically wondering about the tuition students at the high school. Is that derived from the fact that our ascending population has 117 students and you're expecting 26% of those to come each year? Or? Okay.
And that seemed to be, this seemed to be a fairly typical year. And I know you've done some recruiting, I assume every year, but at least most years. And you could do less of it, you could do more of it. So you control that tuition number more than you do some of the other grade levels? Because you typically bring in a lot of students at that age level, and you can do more of it or less of it at your choice.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because if you look at these numbers for the last 4 years, right, we were 156, 155, 139, 136. I mean, really, you could read that as, well, we just had a dip and we're going to go back to 150, or we had a trend and we're going to go below 130. I mean, there are a lot of ways to read it, so I just wanted to make sure I understood that you're basically assuming the 2017-18 year is a baseline that's going to hold going forward.
The 26% number does seem to, the years in which the numbers were different, like the 136 from the 139, the 155, the 156, those all are years where there were different base numbers of grade 8 that they came from, but the commonality was that they were on average 26% of the base number.
Okay, so it's 26% of the base, and you're projecting the base to stay at about 117.
Yes.
Okay.
So just, I mean, I had some questions on that slide too, and I think you may have just answered them. But if you look, so what you're saying there is if you look at 14, 15 through 17, 18, that the base varied in those years, but the percentage of that base that chose to come to Orono High School was 26% in each of those 4 years.
Right.
Okay. I noticed on some of the previous slides you went back, further in time. Did you happen to go back any further on the data that you used for the slide on page 18? Like,
No.
You did not?
No.
Okay. I'd be interested to know if our base, if the percentage of students that we were attracting from that base has changed significantly over time. I mean, the RSU would complicate that, right? So it's not really apples to apples, but I would be interested to know that. So, thank you.
Last question I had, the top line number that a lot of people are going to look at is probably slide number 5, projected number of students.
Slide 5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Those numbers are Orono students only, or they include tuition students?
Those are the numbers the state counted.
Orono.
So it was Orono students, tuition students, and I don't know if there were any superintendent agreement students in the distant past or not. I don't think it did. I think it just started recently, but not the international students.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I'm at 7. Yeah,
Okay.
You're on 7?
yeah.
Okay,
So they do include tuition students? Yeah,
yes.
okay. But not international
But
students?
not international students.
Okay.
And do those include, also on slide 7, does that include superintendent's agreements as well? So it's everything
Yes.
other than foreign students?
Right. The state counts superintendent agreement students.
Okay.
Yes.
Anybody else have questions? Any other principals have questions? We have our expert here. This is your big chance. No? Okay.
And the very last slide, who would have thought the US Census has these kinds of numbers? But they estimated in 2016 that in 67 of your household, that grandparents were living with their own grandchildren under the age of 18, and that in those 67 households, that 30 of the households, the grandparents were responsible for those children. So you've got some potential resources that you may not have realized you had. I don't know if you knew you had these numbers, but it took me a long time to learn that the US Census even counts some of these kinds of numbers.
Thank you very much. That's
you.
very helpful. We appreciate the report, as you say. It gives us
you.
lots of things to start
We
planning for.
certainly want to commend you for being planful, and we think that this will give you a tool that will allow you to really focus your future in whatever way you want to go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Safe
you, Don.
driving back home.
Thanks.
Okay, next up, we have, this is our night of thick reports and pre-reading. We have the audit.
Now the discussion on how to fund the enrollments and increase. I'm gonna hand out some, just extra document. That's just for an extra discussion at the end.
So I don't
So-
think we introduced you for the benefit of
Oh,
the
sorry.
public. So this is Craig Costello, and he's been doing our audits for a number of years. And but you're with Branter, Thibodeau and Associates. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. First of all, I want to point you to what your opinion is in the audit. You had an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, which means there was no material modifications to report on, and nothing that came to light to change that opinion from the best opinion that could be presented. So overall, we had a late start to the audit, to begin with. So going forward, like to probably up that so that this gets out sooner and start the process a lot sooner as opposed to later, which would help out all around. So other than that, it was a pretty clean audit. We had some adjustmts that we did make to the financial statements, but none rose to the level of any findings in that audit. So I will jump to some highlights so we can have some discussion on another item. If you go to page 16, this will show you where your fund balances ended up for the year after all the audit adjustments were proposed and adjusted. You'll see down in the left column under the general fund column that you ended with an unassigned balance of $1,351,470, and that is with taking out $675,000 that you used for your 17 and 18 budget fiscal year. And then you had some other set-aside funds, which is for future debt service and fuel stabilization, and then some prepaid expense allocation. So overall, your total fund balance is $2,157,000, of which only $1,351,000 is readily available for use. And the only other item that was not positive was the school food service ended with a deficit of $14,431. Something to consider going forward to address that and bring that deficit down, because it does need to be funded, come into a positive or a zero balance in that fund. So. Also to note on that fund balance, that is net of the accrued summer teacher pay as well. So that is funding $650,000 of the payroll for teachers after June 30. So that's accrued. Some places don't reflect that in their balance, in their carry forwards.
Can I just ask a clarification about the fund, the food service? Didn't we last month, or last
Oh, right.
meeting?
That's right.
So
It's
we've
just-
cleared it as of this point in time, the end of last fiscal year.
You can't,
Right. That's what
right, you just
we-
can't reflect it in this balance.
Yeah.
Because you can't commit to changing it after the year after.
Right, so
6,
just to clarify, that's what we were doing though. Okay.
Yep. Exactly. So also, I mean, if you look at the statement 4 on page 18, the overall net change in the fund balances was only $12 in the school lunch fund, so it was carrying into it a deficit balance that had not been addressed as well, so.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Page 18, the overall net change to the food service for the year was only $12. It was a positive $12 overall. So it started the year with a deficit that had not been, the only thing that was addressed in that deficit was funding the program by $100,000 through the budget. Not any additional funding to cover it to begin with, so it's not necessarily that fiscal, you know, it wasn't 16, 17 creating it necessarily, so. So I don't need to go through every statement in this. You'll see the footnotes after this, which give more detail to those numbers within the financial statements. There's nothing of particular to highlight within those pages without boring you to a lot of detail, other than the fact that they support some of the numbers on those financial statements. And then we can skip to page 40 and 41. Be best to go to page 41, Exhibit 2. So this is the budget versus actual after the audit adjustments were put in. And you'll see how you came back down to that increase in your fund balance overall. You started your budget year with a revenue projection of $12,234,000. You took in $12,199,000, so you had a negative variance of revenues, which means you did not take in as much as you intended, of $35,502. However, you made that up on the expenditure side, and you'll see on the expenditures the budgetary changes. Those are the cost center shifts that I think you're going to be voting on this evening. But overall, you started with a budget of $12,715,933, and you only spent $12,032,000. So you had a positive variance there to make up any of that negative revenue coming in of $682,000. So this left you with a positive variance of $647,487. So what that means is you intended to take $450 out of fund balance, but instead you added back in $647,000, which kept your fund balance still high at the end of the year, to bring it down to that $2,157,000. So overall, it was a good fiscal year, but as I'll talk after this, if there's not any questions on these numbers through the report.
I had one question.
Sure.
I'm thinking back to page 16 where you gave us the unassigned
Yes.
fund balance, which was 1.351 million. Would it be fair to assume that that went up by roughly 200,000, given what we just saw on page 41, or is there a place where it shows us what that actually went up or down?
No, not necessarily. And I don't have last year's audit with me, but
I don't have it either.
yeah. Just trying to think, you couldn't really assume that just because you had budgeted 675,000 to carry forward as opposed to 450. So you shifted that extra 225 up to that other line compared to last year, so, so I couldn't answer that exactly without
Okay.
remembering that number, but. Actually, you got it on that sheet. You might have it on that sheet. Yeah, if you look on that sheet I handed out, that's where you'll see the 1,077,724.
Okay,
Take 450 out of that, and so it's pretty close. So it didn't shift up by 200. Yeah. There.
right. And that number is different from the 1.3 million because of the 675
Right.
carryover?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So other than differences in carryover, the bank account went up about 200,000, yeah, okay. 270.
Yes. Yeah, cash flow wise, it's pretty well situated, obviously, because
Yep.
sitting at 2,000,007. Any other questions throughout the report? Or?
I think I asked this last year and I keep forgetting.
Sure.
The capital lease is on the order of 3 million. And I know there's copiers in there, but it's not 3 million, but the rest is tied into a bond somehow, and I don't quite understand how the bond is showing up as a lease. Am I getting that all wrong?
Because that bond was, and originally thought that it was going to be a bond. That was how it was presented in the paperwork originally, and it was an error. But it turned out it was actually a capital lease. So it acts kind of like a bond because it was for school construction. But it turned out they had structured it as a capital lease.
Okay, but same basic idea where we're paying over time for
Yeah,
construction that was done in the past?
Exactly.
Okay.
So,
And is
and
that,
so that's your percentage of that total bond or
Okay.
total capital lease. Yeah.
and that's not the bond that's being completed out this year?
Right.
Right, so that must be the Honeywell and the boilers and the,
Correct.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
Copiers and a.
What's that?
We have two, well, it's the same, it happened at the same time, but it's broken into two.
Broken into two parts, yeah, okay. So those will be staying on the books for
For,
a while?
yeah, if you look on page 32,
Yep,
you'll see it timed out there
okay,
to 2027.
yep. Great, thank you.
Yep. So those are the major highlights of that, unless there's more questions. One item of discussion, we discussed this in the past, coming last year as well, for those who were here. The fund balance law, the statute, which covers your 3% limitation going forward. If you were to look at it now, to this day, you'd be in violation of the law. However, it's a 3-year average. That law had sunsetted up until 2016, kicked back in for 16-17 going forward. So then you're looking at a 3-year average, a plan for a reduction of your fund balance over a 3-year average. So, so what that law basically says is you can't carry in your unassigned balance, like in that 1.3 million I discussed, that can't be in excess by 3% of your prior year budget. But and that's taking out what you allocate for your next budget. So the idea is, what the state wants to have happen is that you're using more of your fund balance towards your next year's budget, as well as have a plan for reducing anything that's in excess of that.
So they're basically saying we should be bumping up our carry forwards?
Exactly. So the advice last year was
Or putting it designated.
Into designated?
right.
Yeah.
That's answers in both.
I mean, the choices we have for designation are fairly limited, right? Speds, bonds,
The best one would be capital improvements.
capital improvements?
Yep.
Okay. So tell me though, I mean, a rule of thumb I know in nonprofits is you should have 6 months of operating expenses in your bank account. What's it look like for a school district that has to make payrolls with $300,000?
You can't use that same rule of thumb in a school because of the statute.
So, but
Because they're limiting you on what you can have. Now, the idea is to still maintain cash flow, which to be in the same situation as you are when I pointed out on page 41, where you're coming in under budget. You know, you're planning to use that fund balance, but then ratchet it back so that you have it available still to carry. So that's the best scenario.
But if you did what the state wants and really managed your budget so you come out on June 30th with $300,000, aren't you at pretty high risk of missing a payroll due to cash flow somewhere?
Well, you could be, yes. Now, there's a couple other factors in there in your fund balance. You've got that leeway of that accrued salaries. So
Right.
you kind of have that as your buffer.
Okay.
Cash flow, 650,000.
So summer salaries are part of a buffer. Yep.
So that's a nice cash flow buffer, as well as your appropriation budget, appropriation buffer of allocating that
Right.
and not using it. But yeah, if you were to if you look at that sheet and you bring that showing the excess of 967,000, you bring that off that 1.3 million, you're down into 400,000 plus whatever you've carried in your next budget. It's pretty low.
And in your experience, I guess you're saying this law I hadn't realized it had sunsetted, but it just kicked back in again?
It sunsetted when they consolidated schools.
Okay.
Because they realized that when all those consolidations were happening, fund balances were probably going to skyrocket.
Okay.
But
What's the last time you've heard of a school getting in trouble for that balance?
the only reason it's coming up now is they are starting to look at it because it came back into play. It's the only reason. They were kind of brushing it aside and just kind of giving little warnings.
Yep.
The plan is going forward, I'm not sure how enforceful they'll be on it, is to start looking at subsidy. And those units that are in violation of that statute, they may start taking away on the subsidy side.
And that clearly goes back to the DOE and to political office holders and,
Yep.
yeah. Yep. Okay.
So like it is, like the statute states, it's a plan, it's a rolling 3-year average plan to reduce that, so.
To reduce it to 3% after 3 years?
Yeah, on a 3-year average, yeah.
Okay.
But,
Sure.
It's tough to do when you're in excess, where you are, but there's other ways to plan for that, like the capital, setting aside a larger chunk inside to capital improvement fund.
Yep. Yep, clearly some things to think about for the budget.
And if we were to set aside, excuse me, whatever amount in a capital improvement fund, we would not have to necessarily tap that. We could just carry that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I mean, the town does that. They have 1 or 2 million, 2 or 3 million in undesignated funds, and they have 7 million in designated funds.
The reserves, yeah.
Yeah. So the key thing is undesignated, but, which just kind of blows my mind. That flows completely contrary to where most organizations want to end up, where you have undesignated funds for emergencies.
Right.
But, yep, but that's the law.
As you know, I mean, in any given year, you could have an emergency situation where you're funding a $100,000 student, 100,000 could easily kick in.
Yeah.
Knowing it and hit your budget hard, so.
Yep, if a boiler blows, or you have to hire a couple teachers, or
Right.
that adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yep.
If we were to put money in, say, a capital improvements fund, then that's locked in there. We can't move that back out.
Not without the vote of the highest level, so not without the same vote that brought it into place.
Okay.
So if we moved it in as a board, we could move it out as a board?
You wouldn't move it in as a board, the voters.
It'd have to be the
Right,
voters.
So to move it back out would have to go before town, the
Right,
town.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions?
How long had the 3% rule been on the books prior to the reauthorization?
Prior to many years.
A long time, right?
Yeah, it had been
So-
there a while, and there are many districts above the 3% and that had nothing happened.
Right, I guess that's the context that I think we should also remember that.
Yeah.
I think,
And the only reason it's being brought ahead for this time is just because they have
yeah.
put it to their higher level of discussion at
Yeah.
the DOE as a way of funding.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, now's not the time to test the waters on that. That's the vibe I'm getting from you. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. all right.
But there can't really be any enforcement until after 3 years, since it's an average, right? So.
At which,
It wouldn't
There's
be like
been-
this year anyway.
No, right, exactly.
But if you have to,
at which point,
gonna crack in 3 years.
well, except the officials will have all changed in 3 years.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's,
yeah.
yeah.
No one will be thinking about it again.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's welcome to the school board. You're trying to predict unpredictable things. Yeah. Okay, but at least that's clearly brought to our radar. Any other questions? I think we need to take an action for transfer between cost centers. Do we have that written up somewhere?
It's on the agenda that Angie.
Okay, revised agenda. All right, so, we have it under action items. Did we add that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Is there?
yep, all right. So I think we're done with the
Okay,
report.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move immediately into action items, the first of which is the cost center adjustments recommended by the audit. Just for context, everybody knows there's I think it's 11 cost centers, which are what's approved by the annual meeting, and we are allowed as a board to move up to, I think, 5%. We're way under those numbers, but since these were approved by approved formally, we need to make the adjustments to where we actually ended up spending. And so I will make a motion to approve the allowable budget transfers between cost centers recommended by the auditor to remove the over expenditure in 2 cost centers as follows. Decrease regular instruction by $22,859, increase system administration by $12,886, and increase school administration by $9,973. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Great. Lynn, I'd just like to say thanks. 2 clean reports are the first 2 clean reports I've seen in 7 or 8 years, so that's wonderful. Thank you, great job. And actually, those are extremely small cost center adjustments as well. So everybody did a great job on the budget. That includes the principals. Thank you. Okay, next up we have staff nominations. Meredith, you want to make a nomination in the co-curriculars?
Yeah, so we have one co-curricular nomination to make. We're recommending Danielle Pelletier as a mentor at OMS.
I would motion to accept the nomination for mentor at OMS with Danielle Pelletier. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next up, we have a request for a staffing change to ELL. Meredith and I discussed this, and I think it's likely to involve discussion of confidential matters that could be traced to individual students, and therefore it should be done in executive session. So I will make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 405A, confidential issues pertaining to students. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay.
I'm gonna write that down. No.
Comments on the policy if you want.
I mean, because we're on like first reading of the policy, so.
Do we have something we can plug Michelle's computer in?
We do.
Can we plug her into an outlet?
I offered to put her on mine.
She's being let go.
Oh, she is.
I think she wants,
She wants out.
gave her not.
She's sick of us for
All right, well, we're about to go back into executive session, so we came out of executive session. I will make a motion to authorize increasing the current ELL teacher funding from .50 FTE to 1.0 FTE for K-8 ELL. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. So, same deal on the next one. There's a teacher request for transition from full-time to part-time status. This involves confidential employee issues. So I'm going to make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 405A under confidential personnel issues. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. You want Reg to join us? Reg, you want to join us? Okay, next up, we have request for approval of student trips out of country. We have, perfect timing.
Wait a second, we didn't vote on.
We're not taking a vote. So we're good. Yep, so next up, we have, you want to go ahead and address just the 30-second version of what's up? We have the materials, yep.
I want to take my French kids to French-speaking countries. I want to take the French club to Canada, and I want to take my, whoever can afford it, because it's pricey, to France.
Okay, so can you just summarize the materials that you provided to us?
Okay, sure. Let's talk about Montreal first. I go with this, the French club and the Spanish club, we both go together so that we can support each other, and we find cultural activities to do for each club. We go to a Spanish restaurant and watch a flamenco show. We go to a creperie. We go to a fondue restaurant. Traditionally, we have gone to the Biodome as well. This year, they're closed, actually, for renovations. It currently says Biodome because we haven't exactly figured out what we're going to do instead, but, so that's still in flux. And we usually play Laser Quest, which the kids love, and on the way home, we stop at a Sugar Shack, which I'm always surprised and a lot of kids have never actually been to before. So, they loved that. We went for the first time 2 years ago, and that's all they can remember about the trip, so. That usually costs, not including the bus, because the school has been generous enough to pay for the bus in recent years. It traditionally costs about $350 to go to Montreal per student. This year, I think it's gonna be a little less because we're actually leaving a day later because we had a conflict with the show choir competitions.
And are there provisions for scholarships for students who can't afford it?
No, we do, we offer fundraising opportunities, and what we basically do is say, if you're struggling financially with being able to do this, come talk to us and we'll make it happen. And in the past, we have had students take us up on that. This year, we haven't had anyone take us up on that.
Okay, yeah, I would just second that there are resources, so.
I'm sorry?
I would second that there's various resources I can think of, so I would hate to have a student not go because of financial issues.
Should have talked to you a couple of months ago when I had a student who really wanted to go to France, and I think she's gonna be able to make it, but it's been a
So that's the Montreal trip. You want to briefly address the France trip?
The France trip, I'm going with a company called Students Love Travel, and they are designed for small group travel, so it is just us. We're not going with other schools, so basically we get to make the decisions, we get to decide what we're gonna do. I designed the itinerary. We're leaving, with your permission, we're leaving the Wednesday before break and returning the Friday of break, I think it works out to be. And we'll be staying in hotels, we'll be using public transportation. One of the reasons I like this company is that they have the kids decide, I mean, we're all together, but the kids say, okay, if we want to get from here to here, here's how we do it. And they figure it out, and they bring us, instead of us leading them like sheep. They get to decide where we're gonna have dinner, and they walk in and ask for the table and things like that. It's definitely a teaching them to become travelers. The price is competitive with the EF tours as well. I took EF 4 years ago, the last time I went. The price is about the same, so it's about $3,500, and I have 5 students going.
So for the board, this is just under the policy that we have to approve international field trips. Obviously, France and Canada are fairly safe countries, so I think that was the main concern of the board, but are there other questions? Nope. All those in favor of approving the trips?
Do we need a motion first?
Sorry, yep. I make a motion to approve. Thank
I'll
you, Jake.
second.
Okay, so motion to approve both trips. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience in waiting around for this tonight.
I'm sorry?
Thank you for your patience in waiting tonight to have your turn.
I got some papers correct.
Excellent.
Next up is rescheduling a board meeting. I think we may have even discussed this, but we currently have a board meeting for April 17th. That's in the middle of the budget season. We definitely need 2 board meetings in April, so we're not canceling it. We're proposing to move it to April 24th. In fact, I will just make that as a motion to move the April 17th board meeting to Tuesday, April 24th. Is there a second, and then we can discuss?
I'll second.
Okay. Is there any, I don't think anybody wants to be here during April vacation. I'm not sure if I'm even going to be here, but is there any discussion on this? Okay. All those in favor of the move? All right. Great. Thanks. Next up is policies. So this is technically just a change to a policy. We could adopt it directly under the policies, but I think Meredith and I both felt like it would be better to just go through the due process. And in particular, I think a number of the school counselors had wanted to weigh in on this, and well, I did email them and ask for feedback and haven't gotten anything back, so they may well be happy. But I just, there were people who had expressed an interest in the policy, so I think we should go ahead. We would bring this back for a second read in the second meeting. We can't do it in a week. It would be the second meeting in February. So this is just a first read, but this has been discussed in the policy subcommittee. I think we adopted this policy a year ago. I think I would just say, as the reality is happening on the ground with a number of the students in this district, and also as this issue is just rapidly evolving in society, we realized there were a couple of areas that the policy, even though it was state-of-the-art a year ago, is no longer state-of-the-art. The 2 main areas of change, one is recognizing gender nonconforming as being protected under the policy. That's covered under the definitions under B4, but it includes things like non-binary, gender fluid, and a number of categories that probably it's fair to, well, I'm sure they existed 5 years ago, but weren't talked about 5 years ago and weren't incorporated in the policies. And I think it's probably appropriate to say that's an issue that's occurred in this district, so we felt that needed to be addressed. The other issue that came up was, in particular, informing of parents. In particular, I think there were a couple of situations with high school students, upper year high school students who were 16, 17, who had requests of, for various reasons, parents might not have been involved, and so that's the other major change, is there's some fairly evolved language about, but the bottom line is that the best interests of the student are the primary consideration about whether to include parents or not. There is no legal decision in this area, so in terms of the Maine Human Rights Commission, but it is our belief that if this ever were forced to a decision in front of the Maine Human Rights Commission, they would probably adopt this. But that's a speculation because it hasn't come before the Maine Human Rights Commission, that it is the students, basically that it's the student's choice about the parent involvement. I think that's probably a fair representation of the discussion. So I will make a motion and then we can have further discussion. So I will make a motion to recognize a first read on policy ACAA-A as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
So I know you said, so I remember this a year ago, and I think eventually we're gonna, if we're not already, we're eventually getting deeper into this. Do we know if we've had any issues yet having to use the guidance on specific issues, specifically restrooms, locker rooms, and other gender segregated facilities or activities? I know they've been in the policy, but
we definitely do have transgender students who are under the guidance of this policy. I can't say that I know the details of exactly choices have been made, which choices have been made about bathrooms, yeah. But the policy definitely is in place with several students.
And the plans are the key to that, and that is an option that we communicate, and that we have some students who are taking that option. So
right, because all the details on this are worked out in the plan
right.
ahead of time.
Right.
Any other questions or discussion?
And this is no surprise because I voiced my concern last year, and I don't think, and until we get in this situation, I don't think it's going to come up. But my concern, and I'm all for this, and I said this last year too. I'm all for this, and I think this is great stuff. My only concern is other students who may not be comfortable having someone in that kind of space who traditionally wouldn't be. That's my only concern. And I guess this is, it's all good until we test that water, right, and see what the reaction is. And that's my only comment on that.
I mean, it's a fair comment. I can't guarantee it won't happen because it's happened in the past. But on the other hand, in a certain sense, we have tested the waters. We were the test case that went before the Maine Human Rights Commission, and they have decided that the right of the transgender student is the preeminent right in this particular case. So, I mean, that's a matter of law in this state. So one of the other things we did add, the very last clause, is additional training. We only basically had you can get training if you ask for it, but this is taking a more proactive training of staff. So I guess my hope is that if we have training of staff, that may be in turn something that can be helping with the issues you raise about student comfort and understanding as well. I also know that it's separate policy, but we did ask the schools to take on the comprehensive sexual education standards and teach those standards, and this, I believe, is a topic that's touched on those standards as well. So there's a student education component that's happening as well. Any other discussion? Oh, okay. All those in favor of recognizing the first read? Again, it will come back for a second. Okay. Next up, Meredith, is your sense we still want to appoint directors to this given the conversation we were having today, or should we defer that? I kind of think so too. Okay. All right, so you may recall that there's the Orono Education Foundation, which is an independent nonprofit that a number of people have left endowments to, and the interest off those endowments come in the form of grants that are typically given to teachers for innovative instructional opportunities that are not covered by the regular school budget, and you'll see it's in your packet. The next thing we're going to do after this item would be to approve those grants for $6,500. So digging into this a little bit, this was a foundation started by Ted Curtis, who passed away a few years ago, and he was also a lawyer, so he handled all the legal details. And we're kind of just trying to sort out the legal situation, and we've dug out some bylaws. And the bottom line is that this is currently it's incorporated, it's a legal entity, and in the bylaws there are officers, and the officers at the moment are, at least one of them is Ted, who has passed away. And according to the bylaws, basically the first two members, first two officers of this corporation are appointed by the school board, and then they can appoint, I think it's up to 5 more additional officers. One of the officers is supposed to be a school board member, one of the officers is a community member, and the superintendent is also ex officio on this board, and then those 3 people can appoint up to 4 or 5 more people. In practice, for the last couple of years, I've been the volunteer from the board. I'm happy to continue to serve, but if somebody else wants to do that, we can discuss that. Lynn Curtis, who is the daughter of Ted Curtis, has been the community representative. Tom Perry has been the other community representative. I think the thought here is we will appoint the board member and the community member, and then Meredith is on it, and those 3 people will go ahead and appoint an additional person who probably is going to be Tom Perry for the moment, but it could be more people if there are other people with a strong interest and benefit to the group. So before I make a motion, is there anybody else who wants to be the representative to OEF? Okay, I'm happy to, is that? No, I'm happy to serve. All right. Actually, since I'm named in this, somebody else want to make the motion?
So I'll make a motion to approve the appointment of Brian McGill and Lynn
Curtis.
Curtis King,
Curtis
to
King.
fill the two appointed seats on the OEF board.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, so next up, we have the grants that have been, again, these come out of the interest from the foundation every year. There are three funds. One is a general fund. One fund is targeted specifically at, I would call it civics broadly, so social science, but also government, civics, world affairs, and the libraries, and the other is targeted at music. So you'll see the grants are broken out by those three categories. And since by policy we need to approve grants over $500, these will be going directly to the various purchases. I'm not finding my copy, but that's all right. These will be going to the purchases that the teachers are requested as presented here. There's not, I don't think, any particular obligation behind executing the intents of these purchases on the district. So I would make a motion to authorize the district to accept $6,586.26 from the Orono Educational Foundation to be awarded to the selected grant recipients as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion?
I have one question. Do we currently have archery at the high school?
We don't currently.
Okay.
The particular issue with the archery is that there was an outdoor education course, and that made extensive use of the ropes course, which got crashed in the October windstorm.
Okay.
And they are trying to find other outdoor education activities to do in the meantime, and archery is a proposed activity.
And we have someone who's capable of teaching archery, and
We have a certified outdoor education instructor. Anything you want to add to that, Reg?
No, Leslie Winchester is the instructor, and she has experience in it, so.
okay.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, I would just add there were lots of, I don't know, this is about half of the requests got funded. Lots of great innovation and creative ideas, lots of teachers thinking great innovation. So that was fun to see. All right, all those in favor of approving the acceptance?
With thanks and gratitude.
Indeed. Okay, subcommittee reports. Next policy subcommittee is coming up this Thursday, 3:30. I'm just noticing that there's a change in location to the superintendent's office. Last meeting, we did ACAA-A, which you just saw. The other thing we did is we kind of came up with a list of policies we'd like to get through this spring. Some of them are things that we have to do because state laws have changed. We have to do policy IK. That's the one policy that's required that we haven't done on promotion and retention. There are a couple related to wellness and child abuse reporting that we have to update. And then strategically, we really wanted to kind of finish through the conversation about hiring. It's a little bit, right now, teachers and principals and stipends, well, in general, extracurricular appointments come before the board, but staff, there are some other ones that don't come before the board. So not any intention to make a big change, but we just thought we should have a consistent. Meredith keeps asking me what's the policy on this, and all I can say is there's no policy, there's a tradition. So it would be good to get policies going on that. We're talking about trying to get a distinction between policies and regulations versus procedures, which will kind of set up a practice in which Meredith and the principals can put in place procedures, and the board can kind of have a brief insight to that, but not have everything coming to the board as a policy, which is definitely recognized as best practice in the policy arena. And the way this district used to be set up, it's kind of disappeared for the last 10 years. I think that, well, then a couple more recent topics came up. There's a student confidentiality question that Darcy brought forth. And we'll talk about this at the next board meeting, but I think we should revisit our policy on surveys. Not that we should stop doing them, but maybe we want to be a little more efficient in how we do them so we're not overloading people. So anyway, that'll be a topic for conversation as well. So that's the agenda that we've set for the spring. There's detailed notes if anybody wants them. UTC.
So there are a few things that came up, and one of them Meredith might actually know more about. And the meeting that we were supposed to have on Thursday actually got canceled because there's not any more information about this yet. But there is something going on in the legislature where they're thinking about, instead of the local units paying our local CTE, which is our UTC, then the state would pay them directly. So that money, but the unclear part is how then those students would get money at their local schools too, like if they would only get a percentage, or it's sort of a confusing funding thing then. So, so that hasn't gone anywhere yet, but they're just sort of saying like, they're talking about it, it's coming, they're working out the knots, and so I'll keep you guys informed of that. I also wanted to mention that UTC they did a comparison of their costs per student compared to the other CTEs in the state. And we're really lucky because they're at about 4,000, and most of the other CTEs in the state are about 7,000 per student. So, and it's a pretty amazing facility, and what they're doing with them for that cost. So that's it.
I'll just add to what you were saying, Erin. Today, when we got the preliminary funding report from the state, we did note that they have taken CTE out of local districts' revenue projections. So it does appear they're moving forward full steam ahead with this change, but there still are lots of questions about kind of implications of that. One for us is, last year I think we got about $45,000 revenue for our CTE students, but we were assessed more than that. So how's the CTE Center going to be able to collect additional funds as needed? That's a big question. And then your other thing you noted about how are students going to be weighted in their local districts. And it looks like they're weighting them the same, full in the district and then in CT. So it's a little perplexing how this is rolling out, but it seems to be also a very front burner initiative with the leadership in Augusta around CTE, and throwing a lot of support to CTE, and they do great work. And I would echo the fact that our CTE Center is so much more efficient in the way they operate compared to other regions and centers around the state. And it's actually hurting them in this new funding. I'm going to stop talking now.
Anything else on UTC? Spruce?
Yep, we have a meeting next week, Thursday, so I'll know more after that.
Great. Curriculum Subcommittee?
Meeting next week. I'm not sure what's on the agenda, but I'm sure Meredith is putting it together.
Well, when we met last, I think you were there, Brian.
Yep.
We always meet right after this meeting, so it feels like it's been so long ago. We were working on the work habits, K-12, kind of looking at that. We're going to actually look at some new high school courses at this meeting coming up that are being put forward for next year.
Yeah, it was a fun conversation about work habits, habits of the mind, and how the different versions of that and how that would extend across all three schools. And I think all the teachers had a lot of fun thinking about it. I did. Facilities. So the facilities committee met last Wednesday, with PTC, the architect committee, and we did two things. We spent over an hour with the facilities committee doing a brainstorming about, similar to what the board did, identifying strengths and weaknesses, basically. And I think it was pretty clear the strengths identified were all about the people in the district, plus the fact that the schools are centrally located. That was the only facility thing in the strengths. And there was a really long list of desired improvements in the facilities. So they got an earful. I think PTC was happy to, they thought it was a very positive meeting. And then the other thing is we did get some of the first feedback from PTC of the assessments they're doing of the existing facilities. Primarily, they've been doing the structural and more the engineering side. So, I mean, if I were to summarize it very quickly, our boiler plants are in good condition because that's what that last bond was. Our electrical structure is very, very old and rusty and scary looking. Not the wiring, fortunately, is okay, but the central switchboards are definitely going to need upgrades. The air circulation is also very old and probably going to need upgrades. And probably some of the roofs would not, they're grandfathered, so this starts to get tricky, but they probably are not up to snuff on modern standards for snow loads. They probably should be shoveled or improved and strengthened. So those were some of the main things, I think, that came out of that report. Anything else?
I think the other big thing was with the site analysis, they gave us just some preliminary ideas about how we can work on traffic flow right on campus for reconfiguring kind of our drop-off and pickup areas to try to help the safety and the smooth flow of traffic. I don't think there were any magic bullets in that, but I think they had some interesting suggestions for us to start thinking about.
Yep, and their next step is, now that they have the demography study, they're going to do an assessment for educational space needs. And that's the big missing piece, and then they're going to start to turn that around to recommendations over the next few months. Anything you wanted to add there?
I just wanted to add to the traffic studies were for currently how everything is right now, and not sort of a future adding, subtracting, or whatever. It's, you know, something of like how our traffic flow is currently, what we could maybe adjust.
They were incremental, like getting the buses out of the car lanes and some things like that. They were not big changes.
Yeah.
Can I ask a traffic-related question while we're on this subject? I don't know if anyone else noticed, but Monday and Tuesday of this past week, the traffic on our complex was terrible, to the point that I honestly thought the crossing guard was out sick until I finally got up there and noticed he wasn't. But my point is, it was so bad that people were disobeying the one-way only and just going down that. But it just seemed like it was Monday and Tuesday.
It was. There was a reason.
Okay. What?
There was the agency sent a different crossing guard. Apparently they had a staffing change. And that new crossing guard had not been trained to be able to stop traffic. So he was not allowed to stop traffic until it's kind of a surprise to everyone that there was a new crossing guard. So the police department went down as soon as everyone discovered this and got him trained. So by Wednesday it was better because he was able to stop traffic. So it is a new crossing guard.
And of course it had to be the day that students come back.
Exactly. It was the perfect storm.
Right.
So, yeah, there was a good reason for that.
So were there in the kind of initial infrastructure reports from PDT, were those written reports or were those just kind of verbal?
They're written. We can certainly get you copies.
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at those.
And I'm just remembering the other big thing that came back was ADA, disability compliance. Yep. Any other questions on committee reports? Okay. Any other business? Meredith and I are working on the agenda for next week, but budgets will feature centrally starting next week. So, any public comment? Seeing no public comment, our next location will be a week from today, February 6, 2018 at 6 p.m. here in the Orono Town Council chambers. And make a note of this, February 28th, our Community Facilities Forum and Supper, chili supper and childcare provided starting at 5 p.m. And please, we'd love to have a huge, robust turnout to that.
On that note, have we made any further progress on how we're going to publicize?
The banner.
Did we decide that?
Yeah, so Angie has ordered a banner and arranged for it to be hung on February 9th. Yes.
All right.
And we have flyers that are going to be posted around town. We're working on that this week, and we've started to get the flyer out electronically as well, so.
It should already be on the calendar on the website. I put that up.
I know the principals have started putting it in their newsletters, but the banner, I think, is going to be the big splash.
Yeah, Shawnee, you're laughing back there, but that banner's gonna draw some people. No,
It's pretty cool.
And how much was the banner? Probably minimal, right?
Yeah.
How much, do you know?
It was very good, $500. Sweet. One of the students' parents, Karen Signs, is doing it for us.
If this banner goes well, maybe we could propose a permanent electronic one over the main street that we can change all the time. I'm just saying.
I think you should go to the town council with that. No, but what we found out is the university actually is, who hangs the banner, and, they do it with the.
fire department.
It's not. They do it for the town as kind of a reciprocity, but, so I'm not sure how many more banners we will be able to negotiate being hung, so.
So who's hanging this one for us?
Public, what's the department?
Yeah, Chubbuck is over at the facilities.
Facilities with UMaine.
At the
I guess they have the right kind of equipment.
Oh, so UMaine's hanging it for us.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yep.
But they didn't express enthusiasm about doing this repeatedly for
Listen,
us.
Mark and I will hang all future banners.
Using what equipment? Can I ask one more question?
Yep.
Do we have childcare locked in for this?
I believe Shauna's on top of that, right? Yep, thank you, Shauna.
From the NHS. If only they would drop some of their activities like basketball, show choir,
Right,
school.
Right.
I'm sure but
right.
I'm working on it. I got
Okay,
two.
all right, thank you.
Yes, and that's on the flyer. We're putting that on the flyer in the communication we're advertising. So thank you to NHS and Ms. Goodall for arranging for that.
Eli hasn't volunteered yet. I mean,
I'll be speaking to him.
Nor have Ben and Becca.
All right, any requests for information or follow-up? All right, I would motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? We got you to the State of the Union.